What if one of history's darkest engines was hiding in the breadbasket? Not in a secret palace, not in a villain's diary, but in wheat. That is the strange, uncomfortable argument we are about to unpack. We start with a blunt observation from world history. Human beings everywhere have done cruel things, and no civilization gets a halo. But the source asks why Western powers often seemed so merciless overseas. Opening example is the Atlantic slave trade, and it is horrifying. Guns were exported to the West African coast, fueling raids and captures among local peoples. Captured people were purchased, branded, chained, stripped, packed into ships, and carried across the ocean. The conditions were so foul that ships could reportedly be sensed before they were seen. Bodies were thrown into the sea, and sharks gathered around the slave ships. From around 1500 to 1800, about 12.4 million Africans were transported this way. So, the question becomes ugly but direct. Where did this lack of hesitation come from? One answer the source points to is food culture. Not because dinner magically turns people cruel, like soup with a villain DLC, but because the way people get food can shape the way they classify life. To see the contrast, start with Japan. Ask the simplest question in the pantry. What is Japan's staple food? The answer is rice, of course. Before the Meiji Restoration, adult men in Edo reportedly ate 3 to 5 go of rice daily. 5 go is not lunch. It is a rice-based construction project. Even today, 94.4% of Japanese people eat rice at least once a day. Pickles, miso soup, grilled fish, and side dishes orbit around rice like loyal moons. In that culture, there is a clear main food and supporting food. Rice is the center, and everything else helps you eat the rice. Now ask the same question about Europe. You might say bread, pasta, potatoes, or wheat. But the source argues that Europe has no true staple food culture in the Japanese sense. There is not the same idea of eating side dishes in order to eat the grain. Some countries, especially Italy, eat wheat products almost like a staple. Italy's pasta numbers are basically a national sport with sauce. But across much of Europe, meat and dairy sit beside grain, and sometimes tower over it. Traditional household dishes often contain modest bread or potatoes, and enormous amounts of meat or cheese. So, the source's point is not that Europeans never ate bread. It is that wheat did not become a universal center like rice did in Japan. That difference leads to the next question. Why did rice become a staple culture, while wheat did not? The first answer is the harvest ratio. A harvest ratio means how many grains you get back from one grain planted, plant one seed, harvest 10, and the ratio is tenfold. For rice grown in paddies, the numbers were strong very early. In the Nara period, one grain could reportedly become about 10 to 20 grains. By the Middle Edo period and after, average paddy fields could return 30 to 40 grains. Now compare that with wheat, and the mood drops through the floor. Before the medieval period, one grain of wheat produced only about 1 to 3 grains. In the medieval period, it was still only about 3 to 4 grains. Even after early modern improvements, it was around 5 to 6 grains. At one fold, farming looks less like agriculture and more like moving seeds around dramatically. Modern wheat has improved greatly through breeding, reaching about 15 to 24-fold. But modern rice, also improved through breeding, can reach around 130-fold. Rice is not just good. In this argument, rice is a cheat code. The second difference is continuous cropping failure. When the same crop is grown repeatedly in the same field, soil nutrients become unbalanced. Crop-specific diseases and organisms can build up, and yields can crash. Paddy rice is famous for having almost no continuous cropping problem. Japanese experimental data says unfertilized repeated paddy rice still yielded 74.7% the next year. With fertilizer, the same harvest could generally be maintained. Wheat, however, behaves very differently. In Japanese experimental data, unfertilized continuous wheat dropped to only 36% the next year. That is not a crop having a bad morning. That is a crop filing a resignation letter. So, rice had high yields and little continuous cropping trouble. Wheat had low yields and severe continuous cropping trouble. Where rice grows well, making it the staple is the obvious move. That is why rice-growing regions almost always developed rice-centered staple cultures. And the source notes something striking about population. The rice-centered region marked on its reference map contains about 4.2 billion people. That is more than the population outside that region. The argument is simple. Rice has extraordinary power to feed humans. But Europe did not have rice as its basic miracle machine. It had wheat, and wheat often failed to supply enough food by itself. So Europeans had to cover the shortage with something else. That something was livestock. Meat and milk became not luxury extras, but survival tools. This is why European farming systems studied in geography class often involve animals. Two-field agriculture, three-field agriculture, the Norfolk system, and later mixed farming all connect crops with livestock. Even when animals moved into barns, the system still relied on them. Crops fed animals, animals produced food, manure supported fields, and the circle continued. In short, wheat's weakness pushed Europe toward a deep dependence on livestock. That creates another problem. If you raise animals, you eventually have to kill them. Cows, pigs, and sheep are not potatoes with legs. They respond, they recognize routines, and they can become familiar. For many people, killing an animal they raised would be emotionally difficult. Yet the source argues that Western livestock culture developed a way around that mental burden. The animal was understood from the beginning as food. The source gives a French anecdote. When asked whether killing livestock hurt emotionally, a French person supposedly answered with a comparison. Does your heart hurt when you cut a slice from a whole cake? To the speaker, butchering livestock and slicing cake were morally similar categories. That sounds shocking if you see the animal first as a living companion, but it makes sense if the animal's identity is food from the start. European butcher shops often display heads, hooves, hides, and even eyes openly. Writer Michio Takayama noted dishes where a bloody pig's head could appear whole at the table. For someone used to sanitize supermarket meat, that is a full-contact reminder of anatomy. But in this worldview, those parts are still just portions of food. The source then asks how this mental framework became so strong. Its answer is religion, especially Christianity. In the Old Testament, Genesis says humans are made in the image of God. It says animals of earth, sky, and sea fall under human rule. It also says living things may become food for humans. The source paraphrases this as a powerful hierarchy. Humans resemble God, animals are categorically lower, and humans may kill and eat them. To a Japanese sensibility, the source says, the language of dominion can feel jarring. Instead of gratitude toward animals, the key word becomes rule. But the source argues that this harshness served a purpose. If people focus too much on gratitude, they might develop tenderness toward livestock. Tenderness could become reluctance to kill animals. And a society dependent on livestock could not afford hesitation at every meal. So the worldview had to be forceful, clear, and emotionally decisive. Christianity, the source continues, also lacks reincarnation. That matters because reincarnation blurs lines between humans and animals. If a person could be reborn as a cow or pig, today's livestock might be yesterday's neighbor. Nobody wants to carve Sunday dinner while wondering whether it once borrowed their shovel. So, Christianity keeps human souls human and denies animal souls in this framework. Human and animal remain separated after death as well as in life. The source then connects religious ideas to climate and observation. In warm, humid places, bodies decay into soil, and plants grow from that enriched ground. To ancient observers, it could look like the dead returned as grass, flowers, or new life. That helps explain why reincarnation appears in some religions from warm, wet regions. Buddhism arose in northeastern India, described here as very warm and humid. The source gives annual minimum average temperatures above 5 degrees Celsius. It also gives annual rainfall above 2,500 millimeters. That is not weather, that is the sky running a bath. Christianity, by contrast, emerged in the Middle East, around Israel, and from Judaism's Sinai background. Those places are dry, with much less rainfall. The source cites Jerusalem's annual precipitation as 413 millimeters. In dry conditions, bodies do not transform into lush, visible cycles so readily. They become bone, weather, and disappear into dust. Life appears, vanishes, and does not visibly return as new vegetation. So, the idea of reincarnation is less intuitive in that environment. The source argues that Christianity's human-animal divide fit that observed reality. It also fit the urgent food problem created by livestock dependence. That is why Darwin's theory of evolution caused such explosive resistance. If humans and animals share origins, the carefully built wall begins to crack, And if that wall cracks, the moral comfort around using animals as food becomes unstable. The source even claims that in modern America, only about half support evolution. Its interpretation is that challenging the divine hierarchy touches food, identity, and survival. Now comes the central defect in the system. A sharp line between human and animal may help a society slaughter livestock, but human beings are very good at drawing lines in the wrong place. And according to the source, Western powers did exactly that. They placed Africans, indigenous Americans, and other non-Western peoples on the animal side of the line. This is where the opening horror returns. Slave ships treated captives like cargo, livestock, or worse. People were packed in filth, left to die, thrown overboard, and fed to sharks. The source also says enslaved people were branded with company logos and management numbers. At that point, the comparison to livestock tagging becomes impossible to ignore. The source offers one historical marker. On June 2, 1537, Pope Paul III issued a decree about indigenous peoples of the Americas. It declared that they too were true humans. The source asks the obvious question. If a pope had to formally declare that, what had many people assumed before? Its answer is brutal. Not God, not recognized human, therefore animal. The source broadens this into a pattern of Christian and Western empires. It says Western people were treated as fully human, while outsiders could be excluded. From that exclusion came extraordinary cruelty. It mentions opium smuggling into China to obtain silver. When China tried to stop the trade, Britain responded with invasion and war. It mentions the Congo Free State, where people were forced from rainforest regions into rubber production. Those who failed production quotas could have hands or feet cut off, including women and children. The source says about 10 million lives were lost there. It mentions Aboriginal Australians hunted with guns as if they were wild game. It says the indigenous population was reduced by 97%. These examples are offered as evidence of mercilessness toward non-Western peoples. The source's chain of reasoning is uncomfortable and deliberately provocative. Wheat alone did not feed Europe well enough, so livestock became necessary for meat and milk. Killing familiar livestock was psychologically hard. So a worldview developed that drew a bright, hard line between humans and animals. Religion reinforced that line with dominion, souls, and no reincarnation. But when Western expansion met unfamiliar peoples, that classification system misfired catastrophically. Outsiders were pushed across the line into the category of animals. And once someone is classified that way, restraint can disappear with terrifying speed. The source does not say Westerners have no responsibility. It says they absolutely do. But it argues that one root of the problem lies partly in agriculture itself. Not in a crown, not in a cannon, not even only in greed, but in the ancient weakness of wheat. That is the punchline, and it lands like a loaf of bread dropped from a roof. According to this theory, one of history's darkest moral machines began with a crop. Rice fed societies so efficiently that it became a calm center of the table. Wheat struggled, forced livestock into the center, and livestock demanded a philosophy of separation. That philosophy helped people eat, but later helped empires dehumanize. So, the next time bread looks innocent, remember the source's warning. A food system is never just dinner. It can become a worldview, a hierarchy, and eventually a weapon. And in this argument, wheat is history's most troublesome crop with excellent public relations. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and check out the videos on screen for more strange arguments hiding inside ordinary history.